This is D-Coronel, a second-year Bachelor of Secondary Education major in English student of North Sushatan campus. I hope you're all doing well because today we are going to learn about the two of the various legal bases of special and inclusive education, the RA 10665 and the RA 7277. So, without further ado, stay tuned and let's start knowledge digging! But before we proceed to the actual discussion, let us first know the objectives for today's learning session. At the end of the discussion, we are able to gain understanding about the Republic Act 10665 or the Open High School System Act and the Republic Act 7277 or the Rehabilitation and Integration of Disabled Persons in Mainstream Society, how it works and what it is all about, and to determine its significance for students' quality of learning and their rights to education. Now let's move on to the part 1 for today's learning session. The Republic Act 10665 or the Open High School System Act is signed by former late President of the Philippines, Benigno Aquino III. It is a law that creates a learner-centered and flexible open high school system in the Philippines. It seeks to provide more learners an access to secondary education through the open learning modality. Open learning is a philosophy of learning that is learner-centered and flexible, enabling learners to learn at a time, place, and pace which satisfies their circumstances and requirements. It encourages young people to complete their secondary education, comes as the DepEd works on its last mile, bringing the schools to where the learners are. This is open to all elementary graduates and high school qualifiers of 2 tests, the Philippine Educational Placement Test and the Accreditation and Equivalency Test of DepEd's Alternative Learning System. The vision of this law is to enable the youth to overcome personal, geographical, socioeconomic, and physical constraints to education. Lawmakers saw this system, when it was still being proposed in Congress, as a means to bring educational services to high school students through different means, such as print, radio, television, computer-based communications, satellite, broadcasting, teleconferencing, and other multimedia learning and teaching technologies. As a result, students will be able to study on their own without having to regularly attend classes in conventional classrooms. The law also states that Department of Education is in charge of authorizing public high schools and other institutions to practice open learning, which should still adopt the standards and learning competencies in the K-12 curriculum. Mandates every school division to establish centers in authorized mother high schools for learners of the open high school system. Will hire teachers that will manage the centers on a full-time basis, and encourages the adoption of a memorandum of agreement between the Department of Education and the LGUs to define their respective role in the system. Now let's proceed to the part 2, the Republic Act 7277 or the Rehabilitation and Integration of Disabled Persons in the Mainstream Society. But before we proceed, let us first answer this question. What is disability and who are persons with disabilities? The term persons with disabilities or the PWD is used to apply to all persons with disabilities, including those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various attitudinal and environmental barriers hinders their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. It is an act providing for the rehabilitation, self-development, and self-reliance of disabled persons and their integration into the mainstream of society and for other purposes. It is divided into 4 titles: the general provisions, rights and privileges of disabled persons, prohibition on discrimination against disabled persons, and the final provisions. It has 50 sections in total. It is also known and cited as the Magna Carta for Disabled Persons as stated under Section 1. In Section 2, Part B, the law states that disabled persons have the same rights as other people to take their proper place in the society. They should be able to live freely and as independently as possible. This must be the concern of everyone, the family, community, and all government and non-government organizations. Disabled persons' rights must never be perceived as welfare services by the government. The following are the rights and privileges for disabled persons as stated by the law. Employment. No disabled persons shall be deprived access to opportunities for suitable employment. A qualified disabled employee shall be subject to the same terms and conditions of employment and the same compensation, privileges, benefits, fringe benefits, incentives, or allowances as a qualified able-bodied person. 5% of all casual, emergency, and contractual positions in the Department of Social Welfare and Development, Health, Education, Culture and Sports, and other government agencies, offices, or corporations engaged in social development shall be preserved for the disabled persons. Education. A disabled person shall have access to quality education, and the state shall provide financial assistance to those economically marginalized. The state shall establish, maintain, and support a complete, adequate, and integrated system of special education for the visually impaired, hearing impaired, mentally retarded persons, and other type of exceptional children in all regions of the country. Health. The Department of Health, in coordination with the National Council for the Welfare of the Disabled Persons, shall institute a national health program which shall aim to attain the following: prevention of disability, whether occurring prenatally or postnatally, recognition and early diagnosis of disability, and early rehabilitation of the disabled. Auxiliary social services. The state shall ensure that marginalized persons are provided with the necessary auxiliary services that will restore their social functioning and participation in community affairs. Toward this end, the Department of Social Welfare and Development shall develop and implement programs on auxiliary social services that respond to the needs of marginalized disabled persons. Telecommunications. Services such as broadcast media, telephone services, and postal charges should accommodate the needs of the PWD. For instance, providing sign languages and subtitles, and/or installing special telephone devices or units for the hearing impaired. Accessibility. The state shall ensure a barrier-free environment and access to public transportation and in public or private buildings. Political and civil rights. Disabled persons shall be allowed to be assisted by the person of his or her choice in the national and local elections. He or she has the right to participate in organized processions, rallies, parades, demonstrations, public meetings, and assemblages or other forms of mass or concerted action that are held in public, and to form organizations or associations that promote their welfare and advance or safeguard their interests. We all know that all of us deserve an equal treatment and respect despite our imperfections physically, mentally, and/or even socio-economically. Implementations of laws like these are really helpful and one of the best ways that could help us to fight for our individual rights, especially our freedom to access education without discrimination. Now that's all for today's learning session, and I hope you have learned something. Again, this is Ana Rose D-Coronel, a secondary BS Ed English student of North Sushatan Campus. Thank you and God bless.